Hey guys, I got my Chucky shirt on. It's October. Let's do a Chucky tier list. You might not know this, but there's a Chucky show as well as more movies than you maybe have realized. Now, I want to go through each one, talk about them, rank them, but kind of instead of a tier list, it's going to be more of a movie review and talking about the whole franchise. So it'll be a little more interesting than your average tier list, hopefully. So let's talk about the original Child's Play, a classic, iconic film. It often gets talked about when people talk about the most iconic horror films of all time, the best horror films of all time. So let's see where it ranks on my list. Now, it's probably going to surprise you, but I think this is a clear and obvious B tier movie. Now, is that good or bad? You're going to have to see how the rest of the list shakes out to see kind of why it's there. Now, it definitely does a lot of things right, and it's really cool. It takes the idea that already existed of a possessed doll and takes it to another level as that doll is possessed by a person, a specific person who isn't just like this demonic force, but an actual human being who's got a personality. The problem is that his personality doesn't really come out. Like, he says some swear words, his attitude comes out, but you don't really get that Chucky charm that you'd get in Child's Play 2. Now, Child's Play 2, really cool. The toy factory, awesome. I feel like it ramps it up a little bit and does a really great job. Now, the original frequently gets talked about as like being one of the best horror films of all time, but I feel like the second one kind of gets neglected. And yeah, it certainly does. It obviously does. Now, the third one, Child's Play 3. It's C tier. It's nowhere near as good as the first two. They do a time skip, and they're in like Andy's in military school. He's being played by a different person, and kind of the threat of Chucky is very diminished, right? Like, Chucky's actually very scary in the first two films. As he's a doll, he's small and stealthy and can disguise himself, right? Like, he can be a doll and people aren't going to think that he's alive. So even if you know he's alive, he can kind of avoid the police or anyone helping you because they're like, well, that's just a doll, right? And there's like a creepiness to his movements. All of these films have wonderful practical effects. And a genuinely scary villain, but when you have like the setting of a military school and Andy being a teenager, just that scariness just isn't really there. It's kind of a miss. Will it rank the lowest being in C tier? You're gonna have to find out. The next film. So the next one is Bride of Chucky, and the like head writer decided he wanted to add some gay stuff. And throughout the rest of the franchise, he threw in gay stuff here and there. And it works. Most people didn't even notice. They definitely noticed with Seed of Chucky. Like, there's no mistaking it there that there is some stuff that's a little different. Bride of Chucky, though, gives Chucky a bride, which sounds stupid, sounds like it would be goofy, and the time there was like a decent amount of time between Child's Play 3 and Bride of Chucky. So usually when a horror villain, a slasher villain, gets a love interest, usually it's done terribly. It's very hard, if not almost impossible, to pull off and have it be convincing, but this character Tiffany is freaking incredible. I don't know, it's amazing that they were able to have this character show up and be so convincing and believable and actually add to the franchise, to bring so much, and to be truly like villainous. Like, she's as big of a villain as Chucky is, and it was just so smart to have her come in as like an equal. She isn't like instantly an equal, but she develops throughout the film into being Chucky's equal, and it is so cool. It is so great. and just the effects work, the shots they get, some of the kills are just phenomenal. The reason that I have the original in A tier, these like first three low, is because I gotta praise what is clearly a phenomenal horror film in Bride of Chucky. To me, it is genuinely insane that when people talk about 100 best horror films of all time, most iconic, that they mention Child's Play. Like, iconic, sure, Child's Play, whatever. But Bride of Chucky is so significantly better that it's outrageous that it doesn't get talked about. Not only is it probably clearly the best of the Chucky franchise, it's one of the greatest horror films in general. It's phenomenal. It's outrageously good. Like I said, they do things that shouldn't work. Just awesome. Just expands the lore and the world in such a good way. You get to know Chucky. You get to see Chucky, this slasher doll, get married, be in a relationship. Now, they came out with another movie. I think it wasn't long after. I think it was like 98 was Bride of Chucky. But 2004, they released this crazy movie, Seed of Chucky. Now, Seed of Chucky is off the wall. It is insane. It is wild. Because Chucky and Tiff now have a kid. And that kid is... I don't know what you'd call it. I don't like the term two-spirit. I actually really don't like that term because me being a Native American, I feel like people use that kind of loosey-goosey, willy-nilly when that's like actually like a cultural thing that comes from a culture. And I'm sure it exists in other cultures to some extent, but like, hey, maybe back off my culture a little bit, you know? But regardless, for the time that this came out, for being 2004, to have a character that half the time is male and half the time is female is insane in 2004. No one even knew what a trans person was, like a transsexual, like someone who went from one gender to the other. There wasn't even a term for that. This wasn't anything, like gender identity wasn't a concept. These things weren't discussed. This was wild for the time. And that makes it offensive, right? Like any sort of the political correctness of 2024 is going to be different than literally 20 years ago. And it's just incredible to see like Chucky and Tiffany suddenly have a kid. Like they're dealing with married life and being parents of a child who has a lot of stuff going on, and they aren't equipped to deal with it. And it's just an insane movie, but very enjoyable. I'm actually placing it at the bottom of B tier, but that is not like faint praise. Like it's not as good as the original Child's Play or Child's Play 2, but for what it is, it's pretty cool. I'm not gonna glaze it and say it's like A tier or S tier, but it is pretty solid for what it is, for being as crazy and like experimental as it is in a lot of ways. It does a good enough job. I like it. Now, this next film, Child's Play, the remake, it's staying put. It's staying in F tier. It is so bad. Now, I feel bad for the filmmakers, right? I feel bad for everyone involved with making this film, because I'm sure everyone who worked on this wanted it to be a lot closer to the real Chucky. Have it actually be a doll, actually have puppeteers, animatronics. They wanted this to be an awesome film, just like the original Child's Play. But what we got was a CGI disaster. And that's really sad. I feel like Aubrey Plaza did an okay job. It could have been awesome. but it wasn't. And for doing what they did, and maybe at the time, you could say certain films CGI is cheaper because you can use it very sparingly, but a lot of times it's more expensive. So like actually using practical effects, it can be cheaper. Now it depends on how much it costs to have the cast and crew there. Like if you have an enormous cast of like a huge cast of characters, and it's like Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, I don't know, George Clooney, Julia Roberts, Sandra Bullock, like just all stars, then yeah, it's going to cost a lot of money having way more days of shooting. You're going to have a lot more to shoot and effects to pull off doing it practically than with CGI, whereas CGI you just have a lot more post-production editing stuff because you have to actually build the effects afterwards. It's very yeah, I'm sure every person involved wanted this to be better, and for what it is, it's okay, but the problem is what it is a CGI version of a character that should never be CGI. It takes away all of the weight. Like, no, you can tell even today, 20, like, I don't know when this film came out, but let's say more than a decade and a half later, even today you can tell when effects are CGI and when they're practical. Those practical effects, having something like physically there, it just heightens a horror film's scariness so much. It gives so much more weight to the character, and there's stuff like movements and that just aren't as creepy as they should be, as what you'd get with a physical doll. It just cucks the Chuck super hard, and that's not good. That's not what you want to do. Now, they corrected course in a major way. Now, I've never heard anybody talk about these next two films. I've heard people talk about the series, but no one ever talks about these next two films. I wonder if people even know that they exist. I only know they exist because I saw them at Walmart in the electronics department. I'm just like, Curse of Chucky? That's awesome. I didn't know this existed. I'm buying this. I can spend $15 to watch a movie. Like, if I'm willing to go, if you watch a 3D or whatever movie, you're spending like 20 plus bucks to go to a movie theater. I'm definitely willing to spend $15 to own a film. But yeah, Curse of Chucky. They kind of go back to basics, and Chucky's hiding out in a house, primarily like going after one woman, who's actually played by the daughter of the guy who like voices Chucky, the human form of Chucky, which is cool. I didn't know that until recently. But I loved this movie. I'm like, they went back to basics. They didn't, thank God they didn't make more of this CGI monstrosity. They went back, made it good, made it interesting, suspenseful. They made Chucky scary again, which was incredible. This film is outrageously good. They do it better than the original Child's Play. Curse of Chucky is an S tier all day, no doubt about it. But maybe it isn't. I'm not sure. Actually, I'll put it down to A tier, because there's this next one kind of blows it out of the water. Now, the next one is even better. They once again go crazy. And this is a pattern. I'm putting it right in S tier. I'll explain why. Now, a pattern emerges. Just like we had in Bride of Chucky, then like kind of back to basics in certain ways. Makes it like focuses on the scariness. You still have your comedy, you still have your Chucky awesomeness, but then the one that follows is lunacy. It's just off the wall, goes big, goes wild, right? With Seed of Chucky. Well, Curse of Chucky is tame and scary. Cult of Chucky, though, comes out, and oh my god. Oh my god. So the character that Chucky was going after in Curse is now in an insane asylum in Cult. And there's a reason it's called Cult of Chucky. And it goes wild. It goes real wild. And I love it. You have to watch Curse before you watch Cult, but I very much recommend you do. It is great. And again, it's kind of similar to how in Seed of Chucky, they do certain things that would see your brain would say, that's a little over the top. That's not going to work. That's a little too far. And maybe in Seed of Chucky, that's kind of true. But in Cult of Chucky, it works. It just totally works. Obviously, it's nowhere near as insane as Seed, but it's incredible. It's S tier. It is quality. It is absolute quality. I love it. Now, they came out with the series out of nowhere, which again, I've barely heard anybody ever talk about. The people who have seen it like it, but I've never actually had a conversation with somebody about this show. And it surprised me. Shockingly, it also follows that pattern I'm talking about as season 1 of Chucky. Chucky's with some kid who's got family problems, and he's building a friendship with this kid, which makes a lot of sense. Like, Chucky's gotten better at concealing his identity in a way, like getting away with what he does. And it's really cool. It's interesting. They do a good job. Chucky mentions having a like LGBTQ kid, and then season 2 happens, and season 2 is awesome. It's S tier. It once again goes balls to the wall. It goes wild. It goes big, and it works. It takes the lessons that were learned in Cult of Chucky and does it again in a way that kind of makes a lot of sense. It makes sense that if what happened in the previous films happened, that what happens in season 2 is going to happen, right? Like, you're going to keep running into these problems. As Chucky's gonna learn, he's just good. He gets better at what he does. It's really cool. It's awesome. It gives me everything I would want out of a Chucky series. Surprisingly, I thought this series would be so watered down. The idea of like a slasher TV show seems impossible. Right? And maybe for a long time it was impossible, as you'd think that the kills are going to be watered down, the swearing's going to be watered down, everything that makes Chucky awesome is going to be taken away or diminished, and that doesn't really happen, right? Like, I was very impressed at what was done. And like in the first season, Chucky mentions having a kid. Well, guess what? That kid shows up. And I'm not going to spoil what happens, but it's cooler than what you would think would happen. It's you got to watch it. And season 3, I'm waiting for it to drop on Crave here in Canada. The season, I believe, has aired this year. I don't know what channel or whatever it airs on. So I'm just waiting for them to drop the 3rd season, and I will likely be binge watching it very quickly. And I anticipate, even though I haven't seen the 3rd season, from where season 2 ends off, I think I can safely say that it should be S tier, but below season 2. I don't expect them to maintain that level of craziness and have it maintain, like, also be that level of quality. And there's since I use that term quality, I should mention there's kind of with horror being like the biggest genre in film and possibly all of entertainment. Think about a lot of fictional stories, even books, right? A lot of them are horror. Like horror is giant. Probably not in books. There's a lot of like sci-fi. You get a lot wider, but definitely film. Horror is a giant, insanely large genre. So there's a not independent horror as a genre has very varying levels of like budget and production value, and it's hard for certain people to like accept that, right? That to watch like a low budget horror film and not be like and it kind of blows my mind because I grew up with horror films, so it never for one moment has like taken me out of anything other than when it's not hidden well or like things are just executed poorly. Like I watched the show Z Nation, I think it was called. It was like the Walking Dead ripoff show, and 5 minutes in there was just several there was like all these insane amounts of cuts. There's like stock footage. It just looked so cheap and ridiculous. So like obviously with the Chucky show, there's going to be an element of cheapness and low budget. So, but if you can't accept that with any of these films, and especially a show, then you're just not a fan of horror at all. And yeah, so this is my list. This is the Chucky tier list. Again, and I feel like every person, like this film should have been just below the original. It should be right here. And I'm sure every person involved was like, yeah, I wish we were doing a doll. They probably didn't vocalize it because you don't want to bring that kind of like negative attitude to a project. But in their mind, they're like, oh, yeah, I know. I wish it was like a real doll and stuff. And I wish, we could have done this a different way. But sometimes those decisions, well, almost always those decisions come from the top down. And you just can't, if a studio isn't willing to work with you, then you just aren't going to be able to just summon the money out of nowhere. And, yeah. Like I said, Bride of Chucky deserves the credit. Absolutely. Don't know why anyone ever brings up the original. Bride of Chucky, enormously superior. Even literally, I literally have the entirety of the show as being above it. And certainly Cult of Chucky is awesome as well. I'm not saying it's like a top 20 horror film of all time. I wouldn't say that about Cult of Chucky. But I would say that about Bride of Chucky.